Hello and welcome to Strategic Compass. Today I'm joined by Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who is an expert. He's a Qatari based in Qatar, and then he follows the regional and international geopolitical developments from Qatar. And he's been quite prolific, actually. He contributes to the media through op-eds, and he does give interviews quite extensively, many of which I follow, and I actually benefit from his analysis, particularly in the Alefkar, which means the views in Turkish, düşünceler. So I'm glad we've got him, because he's so many televisions and other news outlets have been after him these days, because they're
for the wrong reasons.
Well, they've been asking him for interviews. I watched quite a few of his interviews lately, but he's kindly granted this interview for our Strategic Compass. Well, thank you very much, Rashid, for joining us today. And we are going to basically, everybody can predict what we are going to be talking about. Basically, we are going to be talking about the latest Israeli aggression on Qatar's sovereignty, and the reaction that violation of Qatari sovereignty by Israel quite recklessly by the Arab states, in particular Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf Arab countries, plus the Islamic countries, as they got together on Monday to basically not only condemn the Israeli violence, but also to propose a kind of military alliance among the Arab states to confront Israeli aggression in the region. And what is actually good about all that is that the Israel, which has not fought a state actor since 1973, is now being confronted by a number of Arab states who have come together, as I mentioned, and Turkey, and including Iran, are supporting the new realignment. Now, I'm going to ask Rashid all about it. Thank you very much again, Rashid, and let's immediately start. First of all, can you tell us how this reckless Israeli aggression on Qatar took place? Of course, none of us would know the nitty-gritty details of how they did it, what happened exactly, but roughly from your sources of information, can you give us a picture of what happened and how it happened?
Of course. So first of all, Professor, thank you for having me. I watched your show, and I think it is a breath of fresh air to go into a show where we can, delve into the details and think strategically after 2-3 days of ad hoc media interviews. They just want, talking points most of the time.
Thank you.
So the last week's aggression, I think we should see it from two lenses. One lens is the technical lens. So how did the operation unfold? How did it happen? How was the decision made? But also we should see it from the strategic lens. What conditions allowed Israel to take this decision, which is unprecedented? The only Arab states that were recipient of Israeli strikes are the periphery states, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. And that hasn't seen action since 1973, like you mentioned. So focusing first on the strategic level, the reason that Qatar was striked, or the conditions that permissed it, is what I think as a fail in deterrence. there is a big deterrence failure. And this failures has, it's related to military capability, but also related to military alliances with the United States. These guarantees have failed the Gulf states in the last decade. We have Saudi their critical infrastructure being striked in Abqaiq in 2019. No American response. The UAE getting attacked by drones and missiles by the Houthis in 2022. No American response. Qatar then being bombed by Israel in last week. No American response. People then commented, why don't you mention about the Iran attack? The Iran attack in July, in June, Qatar successfully defended. It was a failure in deterrence because the Iranians attacked, but it was a success in defense. So I don't really, there is some level of reestablishing deterrence that if an Iranian attack would happen, we have the capabilities to deter. So that's the deterrence failure aspect.
Okay.
Another aspect is related to the Israeli domestic condition. The domestic conditions within Israel is not very good. You have domestic, you have right-wing governments, radical, religiously infused narratives, extremists controlling the government, thinking that everybody is out there to get them. And the Emir mentioned in his opening speech that this is a settler government. And I think it is one of the best ways to describe the current government. It's a government done by settlers. They have an expansionist ideology. Netanyahu has been discussing this greater Israel concept. If you told me about greater Israel last year, I would say, come on, Professor, let's not talk about conspiracy theories.
But that's right.
Unfortunately now,
that would be my response too.
Exactly, and when I realized, oh no, this is real, is when I saw statements from Arab and Islamic states condemning the comments. I said, okay, then people really think that this is a possibility. So you have these two aspects: internal GCC Qatar aspects, and domestic aspects in Israel. Coming to the technical part, how did this attack happen technically? First of all, I need to tell the viewers that this is not one of those ragtag Mossad intelligence successes. The villa that was targeted is well known by both the Israelis, Hamas, and many in the diplomatic circles in Qatar. Even people living in the neighborhood would call it Hamas house. This is where the discussions happen. It is next to a petrol station, which I use frequently. It is next to 9 mosques, 7 schools, I don't know how many nurseries, and multiple embassies. It is a residential area. And it's not a secret. It wasn't that they identified the place. And so that's the targeting aspect.
So there is nothing surgical in it. Basically, yeah, it's a well-known place, so you can easily target. So the coordinates are well-known to Israelis, the Americans, and the others. Okay.
Everybody knows.
Good to know. That's good to know, yes.
Everybody knows the location. And I think this shows Israeli intelligence failure. And, then we're hearing reports. I want to discuss this later, but I want to mention it now. We're hearing reports about internal disputes between the Mossad, the IDF, Netanyahu, and this is part of to understand what happened. So the theories of how the strike happened, there is no certain theory now. The munitions that were used, I've tried to cross-check them. I couldn't identify them because they were very quick in the videos. But it is apparently something that might be a small projectile fired very far away. This can be fired through air-launched ballistic missiles, or even, through a small cruise missile with a small engine, and it can be fired from very far away.
Okay.
The two scenarios are, and these are the feasible scenarios, they took the Syria-Iraq route, entered the Arabian Gulf, shot the missiles and went back, Another scenario, which is honestly, I think is far-fetched, is they went the Red Sea, Arab Sea, Arabian Gulf route. But this would, expose the operation, and it's not a usual route. The Syria-Iraq route is a route the F-35s and the IDF has been going through, every week. They're bombing targets in Syria. They are bombing targets, the past in Iraq. So it wouldn't be something that if the Jordanians say, oh, we see fighters in our radars, that they will be surprised. So I would go with option A, which is Syria, Iraq, Arabian Sea, fire, go back. Okay. And then we have the American response. The Americans called the government 10 minutes after the explosions were heard in Doha. And honestly, and I mentioned this in the Sanchez interview. I don't like that they used it as a title, but yeah, which is, the Netanyahu government made a fool out of the Trump administration. If right. what is being said is true, if there is no complicity, the only option is the Bibi government made a fool of the Trump administration. And then another question asked is, why didn't the air defenses work? The reason is the air defenses that Qatar and most of the Gulf and Turkey use are usually, for certain targets, low-flying helicopters, ballistic missiles, fighter jets. What was used last Tuesday, the really small projectile and potentially flying in an air envelope that is not totally similar to a ballistic missile or a normal cruise missile in terms of size, made it very challenging. And another thing is that the armament of the GCC states is very Western. And and they did this consciously because the assumption was, if we buy American gear, we will not be hit by American allies, Israel. But that assumption turned out to be incorrect.
Well, okay. Well, I'll also get back to that assumption and what implications for the Americans in the Western countries who keep selling weapons to the Gulf Arab countries and the other Middle Eastern countries as a result of this notorious incident, actually. But first, let's talk about the reaction, which particularly Egypt. The Egyptian response was something, in various respects, unexpected. But President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi actually came out very strongly, because the Israeli announcement following this attack on the Qatari sovereignty was that any country should be fearful of what Israel can do to them if they are hosting Hamas leadership. So as far as I know, or as far as any one of us basically who follows these events seems to know that the Qatar hosts some Hamas leaders, as well as Egypt and Turkey. Qatar's was well known because Qatar was always the mediator between the United States and the Hamas, and also by implication between Hamas and Israel. And I think the Egyptian intelligence has been doing exactly the same thing. It doesn't mean that Egypt and Hamas do see eye to eye on philosophical or ideological or political issues, not in the slightest at all. And nor do I think Qatar seems to see eye to eye with Hamas on all these issues either. But it was all about basically political expediency between Hamas and the West and the Westerners. Now, when Netanyahu made that statement, President Sisi came out quite strongly and said, touch Egypt and see what happens. And then he made a detailed announcement, basically saying that he wouldn't hesitate to rescind all the agreements that Egypt had signed in the past, 1979, the Camp David agreements, and the other military cooperation agreements between the two countries and what have you. And what he also proposed was extremely interesting, that he said, we have to basically set up some sort of an NATO-style Arab, alliance.
Middle Eastern, some of my friends call it NATO, Middle Eastern.
NATO. We call it Arab NATO. And in my social media account, I proposed that Turkey should support it, but also Turkey should get into that, maybe not militarily, but in a political military way. And perhaps Iran should also be invited into that. And my, idea is even wilder, quite, in the sense that countries like Russia, China, which are all concerned about the Israeli attitude in the last 2 years or so, should be also invited to come in, at least to support this new development politically and diplomatically. So basically on that basis, what happened in Qatar when the leaders came around? It was quite sincere gathering, I think. There was little politicking among them, as it seemed, to all of us outsiders. What is your what did you make of it?
So, Professor, as you know, it was a very short notice, but even with that, we had a big representation in terms of level, and also when we see the speeches of all of the leaders, the level of narrative has went up a notch. We see the Emir say, naming names, saying that Israel is posed on regional domination and this will fail. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussing about potentially having some sort of military alliance. President Erdogan also sending very strong messages. It was refreshing as an observer of Middle Eastern affairs. It was refreshing. One of the challenges I see with potentially implementing President Sisi's recommendation is just very simply collective action problem. You have multiple actors, different interests. But what's interesting is, which we were not told about, is right after the Islamic summit, there was a GCC emergency summit, because all the GCC was there. And I don't know if you saw the news, right after the GCC summit, the GCC summit decided to convene an emergency defense council meeting, high defense council meeting for the GCC, which is something unprecedented. We're having preparatory meetings with the heads of the armed forces, and then we're having a GCC defense council meeting. And I'm trying to recall when was this, if this ever happened before, and use Google, and I couldn't find any example. It's important to note that many are referencing the 2000 deal in treaty in Abu Dhabi, which is the Gulf Defense Pact, which has an Article 5 like article there, but I think it's in 6 or 7, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. And I think all of this, so we have the Islamic summit, this is a lot of signaling. And then we have the GCC High Defense Council. This is a lot of signaling. But the message is clear. Everybody is seeing Israel as the biggest source of instability in the region. And everybody wants to deal with it. Coming to your point, partners like Russia and China have had very strong positions against Israel. We see the Security Council meeting last week, where everybody, even the United States, condemned the Israeli act, and they came out with one of the few statements that condemn Israel from the Security Council. And if you look at the statements of Russia and China, the statements were extremely strong and aggressive. There are reasons behind this. There is strategic interest for both Russia and China. Russia, after the success of the Syrian revolution, has lost a potential foothold in the Middle East. But you see a lot of pragmatism from Putin when they went and they re-establishing ties with the Shara government. China, on the other hand, is the biggest loser if the GCC and the region, the Middle East, becomes unstable. Because A, it's a big consumer market. We don't make a lot of stuff, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. B, we are the biggest provider of Chinese energy. And China is at a stage in its development that if you stop their energy flow, then you choke them. And then it makes you think, is this the end goal of the West? Do they want to choke China through Middle Eastern oil and energy? It's some food for thought. So what's important now after the summit? So the GCC thing, I think it's very good, and we might see some material next steps, hopefully this week or next week. But this is only a bandage, because the issue is bigger, and we need regional consolidation, especially from the big countries like Turkey, Iran, and Egypt.
Exactly.
And the Iranians have a strategic opportunity to be integrated in a regional security architecture. Because after the missile attack on Doha, I can tell you, as somebody from the Gulf, that trust toward Iran plummeted. But then you have another strike from the Israelis, and now there is this strategic chance to potentially. And today, I don't like citing news, but today, Laranjani visited Riyadh and met with Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and I think this visit has a lot of potential outcomes.
Okay. Well, actually, reading between the lines of the leaders' statements in Doha, what I've also seen, correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm actually exaggerating, is that, for instance, most of the time, until this Israeli act of violence against Qatar, all the leaders, basically in the Gulf Arab countries, in Egypt, they were critical of Netanyahu government. But this time, they used the word Israel, Israel, and Israel. So is it indicative of a change of attitude that, yes, the present government, the incumbent government, is extremely bad in its handling of the crisis in the Gaza Strip, but also in its attitude towards Lebanon, towards Syria, towards Turkey, Iran, you name it, against anybody, everybody. And now it is the same government which is talking about Greater Israel. I think it is a roughly and politically and militarily rubbish. You have some 7 million Jews living in the Middle East, and then you are going to conquer the whole of the Middle East from Nile to the Euphrates, and then you are going to settle people from Mars or what, from the moon, wherever you can bring from. It's a different mentality now. It's not secular Israel. It seems as if they are now back to the Middle Ages. Your emir was right in calling it a settler government, but he could have also said that this is the ideology the government basically embraces. It's something like back to the Middle Ages. It's not the 21st century in any form or shape. So this strong emphasis on Israel, I think, means something, doesn't it?
So I wouldn't take these statements very, nitty gritty and see what they're saying. I think that the focus is still on the current government. But I totally agree with your assessment, because the question is, say international pressure succeeds and we get rid of Netanyahu, who's coming next? Who's gonna? And my prediction, being a novice when it comes to domestic Israeli issues, is that who's coming next will be worse than the current government. I would disagree with one thing, Professor. I don't think we're going back to the Middle Ages. I think we are going back to 1939. And this is akin to Nazism, expansionism. And what happened in Doha is potentially, passing the Polish borders. This is the Nazi war machine passing they will not be stopped until stopped.
Okay.
And it's very dangerous. We're in a very, very perilous strategic environment now.
That's a good analogy too. Yes.
And so unfortunately, when I bring this up with my Western friends in Europe, and they would either shun it off or even try to stop me because I'm making this analogy. But I said, guys, radical government, expansionist ideology, expansionist ideology. This ethnocentric state, ethno-superiority angle of the Jews, and the Jews are the chosen people. That's there, like the Aryan race when it comes to the Nazis. So it's very equivalent to Nazism, what we are seeing now in Israel. Of course, this doesn't reflect the entire Israeli population. I have Israeli friends. I talk to them.
Certainly.
We engage. We try to reach. But I can tell you that everybody in the intellectual sphere in Israel, like proper intellectuals, they're seeing what's happening, and all they can do is condemn, stop, write articles, but they cannot stop, the current progression, which is going to make Israel weaker, which will put Israel in a very bad position. And for their angle, it will destroy any potential negotiated deal with the region. They were in such a good position to gain normalization of all the Gulf states if they went with the Arab Peace Initiative, and
they almost got it,
and they threw it in the bin.
In the bin.
Yeah. And they have caused much embarrassment to the countries that signed the Abraham Accords. The UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. And, for the UAE and Bahrain, none of their objectives happened. Objective number one is stopping settlements. They did not stop settlements. Objective two, which is not mentioned, but to gain some level of, increase their alliance level with the US. That didn't happen. Their F-35 deal got derailed. The Emiratis. The Turkish F-35 deal got derailed, but for different reasons, but still. Or maybe same reasons, when it comes to the qualitative military edge of the Israelis.
Well, in Turkey, quite a number of people, including myself, think that the Americans actually did a very good favor to us by derailing the F-35 agreement, because we are now focusing on the Khan aircraft, which is going to be presumably in the skies in 2028 sometime. Until then, the drone technology is basically developing by leaps and bounds. So we'll see. The other thing is, as you said, the expectation of the Gulf Arab countries who have actually signed up to the Abraham Accords, they expected that they would have some degree of influence over the American decision making when it comes to the Gulf, and the whole of the Middle East, and particularly in the sense of restraining Israel. Now, that didn't happen. Now, what is your sense now? For instance, after the Israeli attack on Qatar, Marco Rubio was in the region. He visited Israel first. He was more Catholic than the Pope there. And then he visited, I think, Qatar.
I think he's still here.
Okay, as we actually do this program. Now, do you think that this realignment among the Arab countries, and also perhaps Turkey's support, Iranian inclusion into that, Pakistan seems to be very supportive of anything the Arab countries, Turkey, Iran, would do basically in trying to restrain Israel one way or the other. As you mentioned, Russia, China are very, very critical of Israel. I mean, you can't be any more critical than that. So, what is your sense about a change in the American policy? Do you think that, as some of the former CIA, analysts and others saying that America is under occupation by Israel because they keep saying and writing about it, or would there be a degree of change in the American attitude and policy, or would they restrain it? And the other thing is, the opposition leader in Israel, Yair Lapid, seems to be taking these developments quite seriously. For the first time, I think the opposition leader is talking some sense about how a change of direction the Israeli policy should take.
So I've been following Lapid's comments on a daily basis. He gets a lot of clicks from Al Jazeera and from the because what he's saying. Of course, it's anti-Netanyahu, but also it makes a lot of sense. Coming to the U.S., I think, and this is me being a little bit critical of the U.S. is in a state of delusion, of doublethink, because you have interests, and then you look at the decisions, and they counter the interests totally. I'll emphasize. So now Trump has to make a decision between the Gulf and Israel. What would be the logical angle? Israel, takes away $30 to $40 billion of American taxpayers' money. It puts America in very embarrassing situations.
It's a burden.
It's a big burden.
It's a big burden on America.
And then you look at the Gulf. The Gulf committed to $1.7 trillion of investments this year. We gave Trump a new 747 when he complained that his old Air Force One was old and he needed a new plane. And the Gulf, the UAE is working with NVIDIA on chips, AI chips. Saudi is willing to invest a lot in nuclear cooperation with the US. Mm-hmm. Qatar is one of the biggest investors in the US. So so I always use this analogy. Israel is a cost center because Trump is a businessman, and the GCC is a profit center. Mm-hmm. And now, when the decision has to be made, what will they do? And unfortunately, they do what I think they're going to do. That means U.S. domestic politics is totally hijacked. Totally hijacked.
It is. And do you think this is going to continue in the same way?
So when Trump was voted in, I think there was a lot of jubilation in the Gulf. People were happy because they said this transactional president will make an economically informed choice when he decides on policy decisions. And the Gulf is in a very good position to provide incentives, to provide investments, to provide, procurement, acquisition, because, we're not we are very wealthy economies that are not very industrialized. So it was a win-win situation for the next 4 years. This is what we imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, and especially after the Biden administration wasn't able to stop the genocide in Gaza. So it's and the Biden administration had very bad relations with Saudi Arabia. So now looking at after, I don't know, we haven't finished a year of Trump, right?
No,
I
it's
just I just
well,
realized.
he took over late January.
So in less than a year, we have, I don't know how many wars, I don't know how many people dead, zero. You know, the only ceasefires he succeeded in was in Thailand and Cambodia. That wasn't even going to go, you know, that bad, because this is the second time they... and then you have the DRC and Rwanda mediation, which is basically, and this is information for the viewers, this was 95% Qatari effort. And before we went to the finishing line, we said, come, Mr. Trump, you know, this is a win. Go take this win. Okay. And the decision, the agreement was signed in DC, even though all of the preparatory meetings between the leaders and the different actors was done here in Doha. So to answer, I know I'm making my answer very long, but to answer your question, I think we're just going to see more of the same, except if we see a unified front providing political and economic pressure on both Israel and the US. You know, you have to make a choice. Either you stop, you know, your little proxy state in this region, or, you know, you have to suffer some consequences. And if you don't suffer consequences, and if you don't allow them to suffer consequences, then, you know, they will bomb another city.
Okay. Well, I agree entirely. And I think with the emergence of multipolarity, which has become almost unstoppable by now, and the US basically political military influence is being counterbalanced, not only challenged, but also counterbalanced by China, Russia. Some serious contenders, basically. Basically, the history would tell us that from a historical perspective, and the analysis would tell us that the Americans will be less and less able to provide Israel with wherewithal. And that would mean that Israel will have to live in an ocean of frustrated people, frustrated with Israel and what have you, until or unless Israel basically goes through a political, how shall I say, rearrangement one way or the other. It is. Yeah, they will have to overhaul their policy and their understanding of the Middle East and their understanding of neighbors and neighborhood, dealing with neighbors in a neighborly manner, you know. And this may sound a bit too optimistic at this stage, but this is going to happen. And I think you're right that if the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab countries, and the Islamic countries, together with Russia, China, Pakistan, others, if they basically confront both Israel and the United States and put pressure on them, they will have to change their attitude. They will have to alter their policy one way or the other. The other thing I'm hopeful of is the U.S. public attitude. The attitude of the publics in the United States as well as in Europe has been going through a substantial change, and I think this is going to reflect on the policy making one way or the other in the years ahead. Now, one more question to you. As you mentioned at the beginning of your articulation, you articulated the procurement policy of the Gulf states in the military procurement in particular, that they are all buying Western weapons, if you like, either from the United States, mostly. Very few from the other countries. I think very few from Russia, little from China. There may be Turkey selling small things here and there. Do you think this latest tension and the realignment would gradually impact on that?
So that's a very good question. So, and I monitor the Gulf defense ecosystem very closely. That's my main area of research. So in the last decade, we've seen a big level of diversification when it comes to defense acquisitions. So some countries that used to buy a lot of US gear, the percentage of US gear is going down. And there's a high level of diversification. Qatar, for example, Qatar is an outlier. We never included any US gear in our armed forces until maybe the 2010s. Qatar always utilized European weapon systems from the 1980s onward, because Qatar was under US embargo after 1985. The reason Qatar was under US embargo is because Qatar asked for Stinger missiles, surface-to-air missiles. The US refused, and then somehow Qatar got hold of a few Stinger missiles, because in the 80s the CIA were selling it to everybody, and Qatar was able to procure the missiles. From 85 we were put on embargo, so most of our procurement was from France and the UK. Now we're moving and we're seeing the defense guarantees from the US eroding and becoming almost useless. There's something important I need to mention. The current relationship between the US and most of the Gulf only occurred during the invasion of Kuwait, because the invasion of Kuwait made the Gulf realize about their vulnerabilities, and the only option was to bring the global hegemon at that time, which was the United States.
Exactly.
And that was the relationship until the 2010s, when we see a high level of diversification. We see Chinese systems being included, especially systems that the US either doesn't make or wouldn't sell, like long-range ground-to-ground systems. China sold it to Saudi, to Qatar, to the UAE. We see Turkish drones. We see Chinese drones also. The CH-4 has been, the Wing-Lung has been operating in Yemen and Libya and Sudan for the right and wrong reasons. But you see the diversification. And another angle is industrialization. So Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE have been very active in developing a defense industry. It started with consumables like ammunitions and spare parts, moved into sustainment, MRO, maintenance, because these are the things that give you operational autonomy. If you can maintain your kit and you can make the consumables, and this is akin to Turkey's experience after the embargo, after the war in Cyprus.
I was gonna say we know it quite well.
It was a case study for the Gulf states. So you see these two dynamics: one of diversification, one of industrialization. And what we're seeing is a lot of transfer of technology and technical cooperation with Turkey. And if you re-listen to President Erdogan's speech, one of his important points was the defense industry. And he mentioned that Turkey is willing to help any OIC state develop their industrial capabilities. Of course, it's mutually beneficial because it will provide the Turkish defense industry with investments, but also there is the soft and sharp power angle when Turkey is involved in all of these. And Turkey is involved in defense industrial initiatives in Qatar, in Saudi, and in the UAE, in different areas. You have joint ventures, joint production facilities, transfer of technology. So this is the regional aspect when it comes to the Gulf. Then you have China and Russia. I touched on China in terms of procurement, but China now, after the air war between India and Pakistan, shows that it is a viable producer of advanced weaponry. The only Chinese systems in Gulf armed forces are land-to-land systems, you know, ballistic missiles, multi-launch systems, you know, rocket artillery. But I think the Chinese now have stepped up their game, and the advanced systems that were reserved for the West, like fighters, beyond visual range air-to-air missiles, like the PL-12 we saw in India and Pakistan, that was very impressive. But some people forget an important angle. The only reason the Pakistanis were able to shoot down Indian fighters is not just because of the Chinese technology. It's because they had a Swedish early warning aircraft, a SAB, that was illuminating and identifying the targets very, long range within Indian airspace, helping the fighter orient and shoot. So it's not just a full Chinese suite, but it's using these different technologies smartly. And the Pakistanis have shown great operational efficiency.
Capability, yes. Oh, yes.
True.
It was an excellent showcase, basically, for Pakistan's ability, but at the same time, it was a very good showcase for the Chinese, pearls, if you like, what they have in their shop to sell to the outside world.
True.
Yes,
that's true, and I think, and China is seeing this, and China is milking the success of Pakistan. And, monitoring the defense market, Chinese sales are poised to jump, especially with the countries that are facing, that have economic restriction, because, Chinese equipment are cheaper, but also political restrictions, because the US and West, when they sell you a weapon, they sell it with a lot of political baggage. And Turkey knows this very well with the F-16 program.
Well, yeah, that is why, thanks to American embargoes, either declared embargoes or undeclared embargoes through the slowdown of logistical chain and what have you, we have a defense industry. So thanks to them. Okay, so we know it quite well. So our experience in that is quite valuable, perhaps, for others to follow. Well, thank you very much. It has been very good talking to you. If you want to add a few things, few points, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can actually end the program.
So since this program, like I said, it's deep and strategic, and we can delve in. And I know the people watching this program are hopefully from the same circle you and I come from, which is like long-term strategists. It's important for us in universities, Middle Eastern universities and think tanks, to think of a future where our friends are no longer our friends, and the people we thought who are our enemies might not longer be our enemies. And we need to think of what can rally us around each other, because the upcoming global system is very dangerous. You don't have any, when you play bowling, you have the safety rails. This new system has no safety rails. If things go bad, they go bad very quickly. What happened in Doha last Tuesday, the act of state terror that happened in Doha, is a sign, and we have to heed this sign and be wise. We have to be wise and brave. You need the two things.
Exactly. We have to get to know first each other in terms of think tanks, experts, academics, and what have you, and more closely cooperation, perhaps joint research and panels and conferences and what have you. and to get our brains, together to produce new ideas about this and the other. It's a very good way of tackling, or at least it's a very good way of contributing to the policy planning, if you like, and also informing the publics about what is happening. This is what we are all trying to do, Rashid, and we are going to continue to do so. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure our viewers are going to basically have a good view of what we've been talking about. It is going to come out with Turkish subtitles in the next tomorrow, or in the next 2 days or so. And then, inshallah, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hassan, and hopefully see you in Turkey or in Doha very soon.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, our dear listeners, viewers. We've come to the end of our talk with Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who's been a well-known expert on strategic studies based in Doha. And he's told us of his take of what has happened. And he's basically shared with us all his analysis as well as his projections about what might happen in the days, months, and years ahead. We'll get back to you with another topic and another expert. Until then, bye-bye for now.
Assalamu alaikum.